Hey guys, welcome to the first episode of Year 8 Speaker Series. Kevin, can you do a short introduction to our club?
Yeah, sure. Our club is the Economics Research Association. So we're looking to foster successful careers in finance and economics. So basically introducing high school students to these careers through things like interviews and events. Today we have Mr. Birman here with us. We're going to talk a little bit about a career in finance in the future and sort of the things that come with that. So we have a list of questions that we prepared and we're going to ask them individually. So who would like to start?
Firstly, before I answer that question, just want to say again, thanks for having me on here, guys, as the first speaker. It's an honor, and the initiative and this club that you guys have started is incredible, and really interested to hear more about what you guys are doing, and excited to hear more about the work that you guys will be completing as a club. It's exciting to see all of you guys here and excited about economics. And for those who will be watching later and don't know, I graduated UCC in class of 2016. I was in Martin's House and then went on to Harvard and studied and majored in economics there. Graduated in 2020 and am currently a business analyst at Mckinsey and Company in the New York office.
I think I can be the one who start. Okay. So I think our first question would be Mr. Birman. How did your interest in economics started?
So Yushan, back to the question. I think that's a great question. And I can't really, pinpoint the exact date, but I do remember, I didn't take economics in high school at UCC. I took history with Mr. Pascalidis, with no regrets. But I was a member of the Model United Nations team. And I remember one conference in Montreal that we were at. I was in a committee. We were discussing a particular topic. And one of the other representatives, Canada, she stood up and she started speaking about economics, supply demand, and how that will affect pricing in the future currently. And the concepts of really like economics I knew basically, but the way she was explaining it was so fascinating, and to me it just made me realize that there's a gap in my knowledge, especially if we're talking about policy or solving problems. And so I realized then that I had to start studying economics, and that's what sort of started my my interest and curiosity in economics. And then going into Harvard, I decided to take a class in economics, and from there realized I really enjoyed it and decided to make it my major.
All right, thank you. Another question we were wondering about is, do you think you enjoy your undergraduate study of economics at Harvard?
Yeah, I loved my undergraduate experience studying economics at Harvard. And again, to preface, it was a liberal arts education, and that allowed me to get a breadth of economic, coursework and study different classes. So I was able to, beyond the foundational principal economic classes, like, micro and macro econometrics and statistical methods, I took classes that were really widespread and ranging. So I took an environmental economics class. I took a economics and morality class, which focused on philosophy and psychology and using economic principles and statistical methods to look at some questions. I took a tutorial class in development economics, which I think is incredibly interesting, on international development and aid, and was able to produce a research report there. I took classes in international monetary policy as well. And, that experience truly allowed me to broaden my understanding of economics. So that's the first reason really why I enjoyed it. The second reason why I enjoyed studying economics was because of how applicable it was, and my economic foundational knowledge was to my other classes. And so I minored in government, or international relations, and in studying current affairs and geopolitics of energy, and taking those classes, the economic foundation, the knowledge that I had, was super useful in writing papers or discussing in class.
Thank you very much, Mr. Birman. That's the next question. How do you think did the economic major benefit you in different regards, maybe?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think overall, economics major benefited me, I'd say in two ways, really. The first is that it made me more informed and knowledgeable about, current affairs and policy and just understanding the world as a whole. And second, it was just more applicable to my daily life. And I was able to have a new perspective on things, including my job. So, the first thing is that obviously I think economics, I think everyone should take the principal economic classes, both micro and macro, just because all the concepts, at a micro level, the concepts of individual decision-making, of, business operating, those are really applicable to personal life. And secondly, understanding the macroeconomic trends at the aggregate level of how, governments and how the world, how nations operate and how they choose to allocate resources and optimize really informs, basically everyday life from business to politics. So on that backdrop, for me, studying economics, I had a better appreciation of, if I'm to read an article in The Economist or the Wall Street Journal, or, listen to Bloomberg TV, all these things that are happening in the world about, geopolitics or current affairs and tensions between countries, all of it stem on, economic principles. When looking at the stock market, and seeing how prices change, valuations change, and companies choose to make the business decisions, a lot of that is the foundation of that is economics. And even understanding how policy really is driven, and, especially in these times in COVID, and how governments respond to the pandemic, both in, choose to provide fiscal stimulus or don't, how Fed chooses to raise rates, and the impact that it has on me, but also you guys and everyone. Being able to understand that, to me, was super important, and I think really important for everyone. So in that way, I think I just have a better view and an understanding of a lot of the major policies and affairs that are going on. And secondly, and I know this is a bit of a ramble, but the second thing is that a lot of the micro concepts and microeconomics are just pretty applicable to daily life. And even if you don't realize it, when you're thinking about how you allocate your time to study for this subject versus another subject, that's an opportunity, cost topic. And whether you believe in the school of rational economics or behavioral economics, I think economics as a whole is really applicable for me in how I think, and thinking more rationally, thinking more logically about something, and how certain factors will create an impact or an effect on other actions in my life. And on that note, obviously, with my job, I think it's pretty relevant in having that economic background.
Thank you very much for that great answer, Mr. Birman.
Mm-hmm. In regards to what you do currently as a financial analyst at Mckinsey, what kind of work do you do, and can you just explain what you do on a day-to-day basis as an analyst?
Yeah, for sure. So for those who don't know, Mckinsey at a high level is a consulting firm. We help companies in the private sector, and also institutions in the public sector, like governments, NGOs, with their problems, and try to really create impact and transform their organization from strategy in the top of the C-suite to the bottom line, the bottom, frontline workers and operations. So for me, I think as an analyst, what's great about McKinsey is that there are so many different opportunities in different fields of work, both in terms of industry and in terms of type of work that I do, that I'm able to, to have exposure to. So again, I've only been at McKinsey for less than a year, and I don't have an exhaustive list of the work that a business analyst would do, but I can talk about my experiences. And so for me, most of my work has been at the intersection of the tech and media and consumer industries, in private equity and corporate strategy work. So some of the work that McKinsey does, like I said, we do both nonprofit work, digital stuff, and some of the stuff we do is in private equity. And what we're doing there is helping clients assess, the attractiveness of assessing, purchasing another target. So company wants to manage that company, they'll hire us and ask, okay, should we do it? And so for me, what's great as a business analyst coming out of college is I have the exposure to actually, get that investment mindset and think truly whether they should buy that company or not. And so some of the things I've been doing there are doing like market research and getting a competitive teardown, so competitive landscape analysis of the client and its competitors, looking at an overall market view, understanding, what the total market is, in that space. For example, say if it's advertising technology, what that space is, what the industry looks like today, and what it's going to look like in the future. What are the risks to that industry? And then, along those lines, assessing whether the client should buy it. And I think, tying it back to economics, a lot of that work, you're doing a competitive landscape teardown, looking at a market and seeing its growth. A lot of it is economics, and understanding whether your target or like a certain company is positioned to do well. So I think, studying industrial organization and those types of classes has really led me to have a better appreciation, understanding. Some other work that I've done, I'll just like mention it if you guys are curious, is strategy work. So again, there it's also helping clients, plan out in, 10 or 12 weeks, plan out, what opportunities for growth in certain markets, or, in certain products and business lines, and how can they really improve, their company top line through pricing and, or, through quantity of sales. And again, that's purely economic driven, understanding different markets, understanding, revenue potential and how customers will make decisions now in the future. And then other work that I've done is more organizational. So helping two companies integrate, and on the cultural work stream, figuring out, how will, the employees mesh. And what's interesting is that 70% of mergers or integrations fail due to actually a cultural factor. There's a cultural imbalance. So I think that work, even though it's different than what I do in private equity work, is really impactful too, even though it's more qualitative and less quantitative. And finally, some other things that I've been able to do is actually more research and knowledge based. So every year, annually, you guys can search it up. McKinsey publishes a global private markets report. So about private equity, about private markets in general. And I was fortunate enough to be on the research team for that and help write that for 2021. So those are like some of my experiences. Again, not exhaustive, but I think overall as a business analyst, you really have a lot of ownership at McKinsey. They really you're really owning a work stream, and that's sort of like the model that McKinsey employs. So for a kid coming out of college, I think it's one of the most impactful jobs you can have, and for both for the client and also for personal and professional growth.
Yeah, perfect. Hi, Mr.Birman again. Let me know if you can hear me. My connection's been really spotty. Is it all good?
Yeah, it's all good.
Perfect. All right. So initially our question here is, how has economic knowledge change affect your career and daily life? But I think you've definitely answered that, just in your ability to be more like politically literate in terms of economic issues. So I guess another question I'll have is, right now, Pascalise is now teaching global politics, and you said you did history. I was just wondering, what combination do you think is best in terms of courses approaching the IB to go into your line of work?
Cool. Yeah. I mean, look, I think there's no one combination that's, the perfect combination. McKinsey hires, people with all sorts of backgrounds, and definitely not just business and econ majors. I think, what you should take really are the classes that interest you the most, and think about it in that way, especially in high school, right? Not really thinking about what's going to set you up for like success to get hired by a certain company. That being said, obviously you guys are all interested in economics and presumably global politics too. So, I think that, having that foundational knowledge is important. On the other hand, if you guys are planning to study something like business or finance or econ in college, you're going to learn everything about those about those topics and those disciplines in college. So why not, broaden your horizons and take a history class now in high school? And that's sort of what my perspective was. Just so that you're more, as Pascal would say, like informed citizens and global citizens, more like literate or more knowledgeable. So again, I personally think history is super important, and would definitely advocate to take history classes. So this isn't really an answer, but basically saying like whatever you think is interesting, and you should really take that.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Birman. So like a lot of our audiences, they're like interested in these kind of economics related majors because they want to presumably they want to go into the business or finance field. As you just already mentioned, people like Mckinsey, they acquire people from different backgrounds. So is it necessarily to study like business related or like econ related majors to go into these kind of business field? Thank you.
Yeah, so again, I'm going to say no off the bat. I think the beauty of having a diverse set of experiences is a diverse set of thoughts and opinions. And I think that truly contributes to a more informed answer. So that's one thing. The second, the counterpoint is obviously, like I had mentioned, business and economics, for me at least, were informative in, and very applicable to the work that I do. But it doesn't mean that what I had studied 100% was like all used like every day. It's not like I, take a certain class in environmental economics or, the Stata or R that I use in a class. I feel like I'm really using that at work. And a lot of the skills that you need for the job, you'll learn on the job. So, that's sort of like my two-pronged answer to say, you don't necessarily need a business or econ degree, but it does in some sense help. And secondly, if you're interested in that stuff, then you should definitely take those classes and learn more about them. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Birman. Those are really great answers, and that will be our last prepared questions. And now we will have our Q&A sections. Does anyone have any questions would like to ask Mr. Birman?
Yeah, sure. I just have a question on when you said before that you collect information about the industry, about different firms in the industry before making an informed decision for different firms or clients. So I was just wondering how you go about collecting that information about different firms, prices, outputs, or just any information before making any decisions with clients.
Yeah, so firstly, there's not one particular way of doing it, but there are a number of ways. One is you'll get private and public. There's public and private information, right? So some of the private information we might get from a client, right, potentially. And for the public information, a lot of that is, researchable and searchable. And it's also, we work with third-party providers, right, who might provide some certain information, do some research on that. To get more of an industry perspective, a lot of the consulting firms will work with, certain companies, third-party companies that connect us with experts. And so we're listening and talking and interviewing experts to get that analysis. So that's sort of a high-level, non-exhaustive list of some of the ways that we get that information, compile it.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, I guess I had another one.
Sorry, Kevin, you go first.
No, you go ahead, Kevin.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so I was just wondering, what is your biggest piece of advice for high school students in general? Because a lot of us are still trying to navigate high school. We don't really have a lot of information in university, so we were thinking that you have already completed this process, so you might know a bit more. So what's the biggest piece of advice?
Yeah, wow, okay, that's a loaded question. Do you mean piece of advice in terms of thinking about university specifically, or just generally in high school?
Honestly, just generally as a high school student.
Yeah. Look, I mean, UCC for me was honestly, a, you know, transformational, like, you know, impactful experience. And for me, what really made it what it was, you know, obviously the boys, and, you know, forming those relationships with everyone and that bond. I think it's, you know, it's incredible and very unique and special. But also the, you know, the amount of resources that UCC has, you don't appreciate really as a high school. You guys are all fortunate to go, and you guys should really, like, you know, um, keep that in mind. And I think taking advantage of those resources and, you know, exploring different clubs and, you know, initiatives as you guys are doing with this ERA, I think that's really the biggest advice I'd have, is to explore and to, you know, take risks and, you know, join clubs or, you know, meet other people that you wouldn't otherwise talk to just get a better sense of your interests. Because you never know what actually interests you when you go and branch out.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have a question. So it's mostly about applying to U.S. schools. So is there any pointers, any guidance you have? And I guess, you know, what was the appeal for you as opposed to an education here locally, maybe at Queens, Western, one of the big schools here?
Yeah, and that's a good question. Look, I think Canadian schools are fantastic too. So it's not like there's a particular appeal. Obviously, Harvard is, like, quite prestigious in the name, and, you know, amongst other schools. I did think, like, in applying to U.S. schools, and I guess I applied early to Harvard, and so I didn't really apply to other schools after that. Was just, well, that's actually a lie, but it doesn't matter now. Was like the opportunities that I thought I'd get, both from, like, the curriculum education standpoint as a liberal arts school. Again, for me, that I think I'm on the camp of liberal arts is great. And again, I think I've mentioned this, or tangentially, is that I totally get the school of thought, like, a major and concentrating in something in undergrad and focusing on it, you get way more of an intense, you know, learning curriculum in that subject. And I think that's totally awesome too. But for me, being able to, like I said, take, like, subjects in a number of different areas was super important. And I thought that at Harvard there was, again, a lot of resources that perhaps certain Canadian schools might not have had, and you know, not necessarily maybe a better education, but just because of the way that Harvard is, a lot of focus on the undergraduates, and, you know, like a community, a network that would facilitate my experience, my education. Like, you know, a lot of people that would advise me or care for me or show me, you know, the ropes in university. So that was sort of like a big appeal to me. But again, that's not to, like, say that in any way American schools are better than Canadian schools.
Perfect. And do you have any tips or guidance for just, like, the application process in general?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think, like, it's important, obviously, to do your research and to apply to schools where you really think you're gonna be a good fit, and it'll be a good fit for you. And then I do think that, obviously, there's a lot of components about standardized testing, which I'm not actually sure if they're still including these days.
Well, a lot of them have moved to test optional.
Yeah.
I think it's still recommended in things like
Okay.
that. Yeah.
So again, I wouldn't, like, stress too much, guys, about studying. But again, like, you know, if you're going to apply, if you know you want to apply to U.S. schools, taking the time and making sure that you're prepared for the standardized testing. I would say putting a lot of effort into the essays. At least for me, I thought that was, you know, a really incredible, sort of important point of the application. So spending time with the guidance counselors, like, iterating on those. And then obviously certain U.S. schools value, you know, your experiences. So part of it is what I mentioned before about making the most of the opportunities. Really, like, again, you guys are in a fascinating place with a lot of opportunities. Really, you know, make them, like, you know, take advantage of that and start doing things and, I think that will just like come through in the application that you guys have interests and are pursuing different things like this ERA because you're interested in it. And that's really what universities are looking for.
Perfect. Thank you.
I'm also happy to discuss privately or whatever if you want more specific questions like or answers about my university like application process and some specific stuff. Always happy to help.
Okay.
Hi, Mr. Birman. I also got like a question about like the job application thing.
Yeah.
Is that like Mckinsey, as we know, is like very competitive to get in, especially as like a college student. And like a lot of college students, they want to apply to these kind of good firms when they graduated. So what do you think should like a college student do to help them prepare to apply for these kind of good companies or like prestigious or like large companies?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of similar stuff. Again, there's no one set formula, but obviously, doing well in school and like focusing that, having some leadership experience is important. Showing, problem solving abilities and a genuine interest in the, either in finance or consulting or whatever institution that you're applying for. So I think really those are like the main things. And so like stepping back, I would say, obviously you want to position yourself as a top candidate, but inclusive in that is showing like why consulting or finance, would be a good fit for you and like showing interest in that topic. So that could be, doing or joining clubs that are like our finance clubs or consulting clubs, on college and demonstrating interest there. That could be, something personal, that maybe is applicable to like why you're interested in finance. So a number of different reasons. So that's one thing. But again, I wouldn't say there's necessarily one route. I also think it's important to network and meet people. I think in consulting, it matters less so than in finance, where it's important just to reach out and to speak with individuals who have gone through the process themselves or are working at those companies, so they get a better sense of like who you are and like why you're interested in that particular company.
Thank you.
I just have a question about for students that aren't taking economics in school, or if they are taking economics and want to further their knowledge, what extra resources or suggestions do you have for students to try and extend their knowledge, either just to learn more or even past the curriculum that they're currently learning?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there are a lot of, resources out there, obviously on the internet, and books that, can help you learn. So whether it's just literally picking up a textbook for a certain particular like niche economic subject, I think that's super helpful. Whether it's subscribing to The Economist or any sort of business journal and reading daily about economics or, like I said, business or current affairs, and starting to piece together some of the economic trends that you're seeing, whether it's listening to podcasts or subscribing to, a YouTube channel that's like economics focused, you can learn about that. There are a number of ways to get informed about economics or like similar topics beyond the curriculum. I think once you're in college or even high school, like you guys are doing, joining a club and having discussions is super important. In college, there are a number of clubs or extracurriculars that are economics related, and you can do cool things. Like I know Harvard had an economics team that would present policy to the Fed, and it was like a competition. It's sort of like a model event thing. I think that's super cool. For me, I spent most of my extracurricular time actually doing or teaching economics. So I was a TF for a couple of years for international macroeconomics, at the intermediate level. I was a CA for international monetary policy and trade classes, and also a supervisor for econ unit review, which is like a foundational extra session for kids in the intro econ classes. And so by that measure, I was just like always, and I was tutoring, so I was always just learning more about economics. And there's, every time I teach something, I learn something else. So again, there's a lot of ways to get involved. I think reading and listening and learning is a lot. And then also acting and trying to like think about what you're actually learning, because economics might be just a lot of graphs, and really trying to think about how it applies to the real world. And that's like a next level thinking. If that gets you, it's a bit more challenging, but it makes you more, informed about the topic.
Thank you.
Okay, does anyone have a few more questions or? Okay, I think that will be the end. Thank you, Mr. Birman, again. Those are really great suggestions. Like you mentioned, subscribe to The Economist, like myself. Well, my daily routine right now is to read Financial Times. And I felt like, every day reading about those financial news, how the economics applying the real life situation really helps me a lot, in studying and learning economics. And okay, thank you again, sir, for giving us this chance to listen from the best, to learn from the best. And thanks to all the ERA members who showed up. Also thanks to you, whoever is watching our first episode of ERA speaker series. Hope you find this interview is helpful for studying economics. This is just a start. We will invite more and more expert and industrial professional in the future, study and learn economics for them. Again, thanks for your guys' support and hope to see you again.